Hello there, and welcome to the Fish Tank Barn. I view 55-gallon tanks as kind of a gateway tank. I feel that there comes a point in the life of many aquarists where you've played with smaller fish in smaller tanks, but now want to play with something bigger, either wanting bigger fish or more fish. This is the point where a lot of people gravitate towards a 55-gallon tank as their first big tank. This tank size does have a unique footprint, being 4 feet long, 21 inches tall, and 13 inches wide. However, the width in these tanks can be a little bit limiting, especially if you're looking to keep larger fish. So let's go ahead and dive into the fish barn and talk about some of my favorite fish and plants for a 55-gallon aquarium. Since I only own one 55-gallon tank, I figured that would be the best place to start. For the others, we'll look at setups that are either 75-gallon tanks or 40 breeders that can be adapted to a 55-gallon tank. The tank that we're currently looking at is home to my Cyprochromis leptosoma blue flash, and this is my favorite tank in the fish barn. This tank is heavily planted with crypts, which provides spaces for fry, as well as add some height to the back of the aquarium. I really enjoy the movement of all the Cyprochromis, along with the bright colors that they possess. This tank does have a sand bottom, which is typical for any Lake Tanganyika tank. While the Cyprochromis can be difficult to find and don't ship very well, I still think Cyprochromis are a great fish for a 55-gallon aquarium. If you're looking for a more community-type Lake Tanganyika setup, the height of the 55-gallon tank makes it possible to do a pretty interesting setup. You can have the same tank that we saw just a moment ago, but instead add some shell dwellers to the bottom of the tank, like a Neolamprologus similis or Neolamprologus multifasciatus. The sips will occupy the top and middle of the tank, while the shellies will occupy the bottom. This lets you have the shellies with their unique personalities and the sips with all their color and movement. One thing to keep in mind though, is that the shellies will dig in the substrate, so you can only use floating plants or else the shellies will rip them out. While I've not done this particular setup personally, it is a pretty common setup to do with Lake Tanganyika cichlids. Before we leave Lake Tanganyika though, I do want to show you another unique fish that I have here in the barn, and that's the Callichromis macrops. These fish have a little bit more jittery behavior than the sips, but are still a lot of fun to watch. The females are a little bit drab, but the males do have a nice red sheen to them. While I do have this group in a 75-gallon tank, you could easily put this same group in a 55-gallon without any issue. Like the shellies that we talked about earlier, these fish do dig in the stand, so I would only probably do floating plants with them as well. If you're looking for something a little bit more unique, then maybe taking a look at something like the Callichromis macrops might be a great addition for your 55-gallon tank. One of the great benefits that a 55-gallon tank has to offer is it has a lot of space for medium to large size schooling fish. One fish that really comes to mind for me for 55-gallon tanks are the Millinotaenia species of rainbow fish. These fish do get quite long and are very active, so they are not necessarily great for a smaller tank like a 20 or 29-gallon, but a 55-gallon is great for them. The 4-foot length of this tank gives them plenty of swimming space. The 75-gallon tank that you're looking at now is primarily planted with Vallisneria, which is another great background plant since it grows quite long. In my experience, this plant has grown quite fast for me, so keep that in mind. Like the Cyprochromis that we saw earlier, these fish are always moving, and once they grow up, the males are quite colorful. Like I said earlier, this was a 75-gallon tank, but this is something that you could easily adapt and set up in a 55. Since the rainbow fish are generally mid and top water swimmers, you can always add some fish to the bottom, like Corydoras catfish or bristlenose plecos. This will give you some pretty cool fish that will eat the food that falls to the bottom of the tank. This next tank we're looking at is a 70-gallon tank, which is the same footprint as a 55, but just taller. In this tank you'll find the flagfin shiner, which is another unique schooling fish. There are a lot of underrated North American shiners that would do great in a 55-gallon tank. The rainbow shiner is one that comes to mind, and it's absolutely stunning. The flagfin shiner that we're looking at is native to Florida, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and is a lot of fun to watch. Like the rainbow fish, these fish are very active and provide a lot of movement in the tank. What really drew me to these fish are their unique striped patterns. This tank was recently planted with crypts as well, which seems to break up the tank quite a bit. If you're looking for a unique schooling fish, then a native minnow like these shiners would definitely be something to keep an eye out for. If I had more 55-gallon tanks in my fish room, one thing I would make sure to do is have some more live bearer breeding tanks. The 75-gallon tank that you're looking at right now is home to my trout goodians. Again, this is another setup you could easily put in a 55. I've set this tank up as a breeding tank with a bunch of floating Java moss at the top to provide cover. I recently came up with this idea since as part of my fish club, we recently took down a retired member's fish room and he had the Java fern floating on the top of the tank to act as fry cover. This tank also has some crypts that I planted in here as well. While I don't exactly call this an aquascape tank, I do enjoy looking amongst the Java fern and looking for fry. If you're looking for a more aquascape live bear breeding tank, then take a look at this 75-gallon tank that's home to my Amicus splendens. This tank is heavily planted with crypts and has some driftwood to give it a more aesthetic feel. While you don't necessarily have to have Gadaeans in a tank like this, you could do a lot of other live bears as well. The crypt garden really provides a lot of great cover for fry. Since we talk a lot about live bears, there are a couple of live bears that I really like for a 55-gallon tank, and that's the swordtails and mollies. Swordtails can get pretty large, and you can really set up a nice breeding colony of them in a 55-gallon tank. I currently have this breeding group of marble swordtails in a 40 breeder, but you could easily put these same fish in a 55-gallon, and they would do quite well. While the Liberty mollies in this 29-gallon tank are not very large, you could do a large school of sailfin mollies in a 55-gallon as well. If you provide some plant cover for the fry, you can really come up with a nice breeding colony for both the swords and the mollies. I would be remiss if we didn't discuss Mbuna for a 55-gallon aquarium. These Lake Malawi African cichlids are very colorful, and if done correctly, you can really have a beautiful tank. You are currently looking at a prior setup where I had purple ACI and yellow labs. While the ACI do get quite large, you could definitely put some yellow labs in a 55-gallon tank. There are quite a few smaller Mbuna species that you can put in a 55-gallon tank, but I would make sure to do your research since some of these fish can be quite aggressive, but there are peaceful options out there. These Manjano cichlids are a little bit more aggressive, but they're not unreasonable. I would make sure you have plenty of line of sight blocks with either high rocks or plants. One of my favorite plants for this purpose is Vallisneria, since it grows so tall. You will also need to overstock the tank to curb aggression as well. Since you are overstocking these tanks, and these are larger fish, you will have to deal with a lot more waste. So you'll need beefed up filtration, like a canister filter or hang on the back filter. I would also stay away from the haps and peacocks from Lake Malawi, since they tend to be a little bit larger and require a larger tank. I hope that you enjoyed taking a look at some ideas for your next 55-gallon aquarium. One of the nice things about a 55-gallon tank is that you really do have a ton of options, and we only scratch the surface of the possibilities. At the end here, I'll go ahead and put a playlist of my other fish tank idea videos, as well as my last fish room tour. So as always, thank you for watching, stay safe, stay fishy, and I'll catch you on the next video.